But while we're waiting for other folks to join us, I just want to thank you so much, say thank you so much to all of the panelists that are volunteering their time today. A very sincere thank you for being here and for putting your stories out there to help other folks who are interested in this very awesome profession that we have. So thank you again so much for your time and for sharing your story with us. This is APA Illinois' first webinar, so we're really excited to get this. And I'm showing 204, so I'm going to introduce our moderator here. This is, this event is the idea of our moderator, Phil Greene. He is the planner in the village of Woodridge. And I think that Phil's history helped him come to this idea to have this webinar. He came to the United States from Liverpool, England in 2018, and he originally had a career as a teacher, sociology and politics. So he himself has a winding path to the planning profession. And so I want to thank him so much for being here. And if I didn't mention it, my name is Emily Egan. I am on the APA Illinois board, and I'm just here to facilitate this introduction for the moderator, Phil Greene, and to say thank you so much for putting this all together, and Paula, who is with us today as well. Thank you both so much. All right.
We'll get it going. Firstly, again, just want to echo Emily's thank you to our great panel that is joining us today. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of really interesting and useful discussion. Everybody here has a unique story to tell, and above all else, a real passion for passing on the interest in planning, the story as to how they got into the position that they're in today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We understand that this is a pretty interesting time to be starting a career. And while we can't necessarily promise any concrete answers as to what to do next, I hope that if you're listening to this and watching this, you can at least find some inspiration in the fact that it is possible to attain a career that you enjoy and love so much that you can really pass it on to the next generation. As Emily said, my name is Phil Greene. I am a planner with the Village of Woodridge, and I am also a member of the APA Illinois Membership Committee, and I've been living here in the United States for a couple of years now. Joining me today is John Carlisle, who's a senior planner with the City of Park Ridge, Tim Gustafson, who is the senior planner with Epstein, Nina Idemudia, who is the director of planning with MUSE Community and Design, Katanya Raby, who is a policy advisor with the City of Chicago Mayor's Office, and our special guest, Mike Earl, who is with GovHR USA, and who has some very helpful resources that should be available to everybody on this call as it comes to really finding that next step for you. We know that a lot of people joining us here today might be students. Some of you may be employed, but uncertain about how the future is going to play out. And so we really hope all of you find something useful from this. Just a kind of overview as to how this is going to progress today. The plan is for us to have a discussion amongst the panelists for about the first 45 minutes or so, and then we'll save the last 15 minutes for any new questions and follow-up that comes out. So please use the chat box. That is what it is there for. If you have any specific questions based on things that you hear. And as you all know, when you registered for this webinar, we asked you for questions in advance. We have taken those, we have read those, we've analyzed them, and those will be what we will be using to shape the conversation here today. If there's anything that we don't get to specifically today, please rest assured that we are aware of the questions you've asked, of the needs that you have. And as a professional body, APA Illinois is listening, and we'll be using those questions to shape the content and the support that we give you moving forward. So with that being said, I will ask each of our panelists to kind of introduce themselves one by one and give you all a little bit of a background about what they do today and really kind of how they got there. So Tim, if we can start off with you, please.
Sure, and good afternoon, everybody. I was scanning the attendees list and I see some familiar names. I also see a lot of new names, which is exciting to see that we're getting to meet a lot of people for the first time, which is great. So as Philip mentioned, my name is Tim Gustafson and I'm a senior planner at Epstein, which is a consulting firm. So I'm in the private sector and I've been in the industry for about 14 years now. And I come to it from the background of transportation. I had, when I was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, I was under the impression that I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a designer. And so I went to school at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, if there's anybody from Ball State on the line. And when you start there, you actually are in the College of Architecture and Planning. So you take a semester of landscape architecture, you take a semester of intro to architecture, and you take urban planning. And it turns out I actually had a real fondness for urban planning and didn't realize it until I had been exposed to it. So that's when I declared my major and decided that I wanted to become an urban planner. I finished up there and then decided I wanted to specialize in transportation. So that's what brought me back to the University of Illinois at Chicago. So I also hail from there, which is very great. And to me, it was always an interest in getting into the city where I wanted to work. So that was a lot of what motivated my desire to move to Chicago. I'm from Illinois originally, so it was like coming back home. And then I got into that from the perspective of being in transportation as an intern. I worked for a division of transportation for a few summers. And so that's basically the brief intro. And I know that as we have other questions, I can go into more detail on kind of how some of that has been shaped over time. But that's my basic introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And Katanya, same question to you. If you can tell us a little bit about what you do today and how you got to be doing it.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. So I am a policy advisor in the mayor's office, and I had a really interesting meandering road to get there. I had no interest whatsoever in working in city government. Let's just put that out there. But I actually started off somewhat like Tim with a strong interest in architecture, and I've been doing architecture in high school. I'm a graduate of Chicago Public Schools, and so they had some really great architecture programs within that system. And so I went to UIC, started off in architecture at UIC, had some different life challenges come my way, and didn't really get the support that I needed as an architect or a Black young woman in a very white male dominated space. I didn't really know how to navigate the university or understand the late nights of, staying up multiple nights to get projects done. And I was like, what is this? So I didn't wind up staying in the architecture program. I wound up changing my major to sociology with a very broken heart, actually, because I really wanted to pursue architecture. I had done a lot of really cool internships. I interned with Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, and just really great experiences, but it just didn't work out. So I completed my bachelor's degree in sociology and communication. And then later on, I got involved in doing social work and community work. And while I really enjoyed working with communities, I really still had a fond love of the built environment. And at this time, I still didn't know anything, didn't know a lot about urban planning. I did take a couple of urban planning courses during undergrad, because that was my junior year of undergrad. That was the first time I had really learned what it was. But I was like, I want to go and pursue this a little bit more, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back for a master's or not. Then something happened in my personal life that kind of kicked me into gear, and was like, okay, I need to go ahead and figure out what my passions are. And my passion was definitely that mix of the built environment and the social dynamics of communities. And so that's when I figured out that I wanted to pursue planning. And I went to UIC for grad school as well. And it was like the best decision I had ever made. I'm so happy in this career. I worked in a couple of smaller agencies before landing a job at or smaller like for-profit firms before landing a job at CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And I worked there for about 4 years. And that experience was amazing because I had a chance to really dig deep into the areas of planning that I was most interested in. And a lot of that was being able to focus at the community level, and but then also having this bird's eye view at the regional level and seeing how those things connect. And I also got a chance to connect with youth, which was something I was doing before I switched careers. I got a chance to reconnect with youth in the planning realm and started managing FLIP's Future Leaders and Planning program, which was my baby, my pride and joy. Very proud of the work that was done while I was there and continues to happen. And then recently in January, I started with the mayor's office, focusing primarily on place-based initiatives, ETOD, equitable transit-oriented development, housing. If those of you who are from the city may have heard of Invest Southwest. So those are some of the things that I work on, and kind of bringing the planning perspective to the mayor's office, which is something that's new for them, so I'm really excited to be able to do that. But that's me, I think.
Great, thank you. John, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got there, please. John, I think we got you on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
We're good.
Great. I'm the first to do that. No one else has to do that now. I did that, so it's out of the way. Okay, well, Phil, I believe this is a second career for you, planning, and that's actually the same story for me. So we'll start first, as you asked, where I am now. Senior planner with the city of Park Ridge. Park Ridge is just northwest of Chicago, kind of the first suburb on the northwest line of Metro going up that way. It's in the O'Harea, as I like to call it. I've been there for a little over 2 years. And how my planning journey specifically, got started, I was vaguely aware of the career when I was getting my undergraduate degree. But mostly through like the policy angle. I actually wasn't that interested in architecture. So design wasn't really on my radar, but politics and policy were. I got an English degree, specifically professional writing at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio. I graduated and was part of a teacher corps. So I moved to Arizona and lived in Phoenix for a while. And while, so like you, Phil, teaching, but that's, I think, when the spark for planning was starting to be lit. And, planners don't like to speak ill of places. Generally, we think all places have something of redeeming value, and they all do, I believe. But really, Phoenix was the place where I got to experience some of the shortfalls of city design firsthand. I was living a long way from my job. I got to experience the grinding commute for the first time in hiking the mountains there, which I still would really enjoy if I went to visit. I got to experience the smoggy film over the valley that's just so obvious when you live there. So in Arizona, I worked as a teacher, and then I also, because I was an English language arts teacher, transitioned to being an editor for a publishing company. It was also based out of Phoenix, and interested in city stuff. The light rail was opening in Phoenix at the time, which I thought was cool and a step in the right direction. But I didn't really know anything about it professionally. My journalism career, however short-lived, was in B2B publishing or business to business. So these are like trade magazines and trade shows for very niche audiences. And one of them is the self-storage industry, everyone's favorite land use. Believe it or not, there's a lot of discussion about development in the self-storage industry, and where is zoning amenable to building our stuff? Okay, all of your opinions about self-storage aside. So in covering that industry as a journalism, I got my first introduction to zoning and thought that was cool. So slowly the pieces of planning were starting to line up in my mind. This was about 2009, 2010. I know we might have a little bit of a look back in our questions about the last great recession, so to speak. So that was wreaking havoc in my journalism job. A lot of folks were getting laid off. Wasn't looking too good for me, honestly. The company I worked for wasn't in great health. And I was starting to try to think about the next thing. What do I like? What else could I do? Maybe where could I go? I'm not from Phoenix. I didn't have any family or any connections there. So I had an opportunity to move to Chicago, room with one of my best friends from high school, kind of restart everything. And in doing that, discovered the Masters of Urban Planning program at UIC, applied. It took me a while to kind of line up how that was going to work. I did that program slowly over a few years, part-time, while I kept my full-time job, and just kind of piece by piece transitioned into planning, first with an internship, then a role with a consultant, then finally a full-time role with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, which I worked with Katanya there, and then now with Park Ridge. So those are the steps.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And Nina, same question for you, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nita Idemudia. And my pathway to planning is, I guess you would say, unconventional. I did not grow up knowing what planners were, or what planning was, or what land use was, what zones, any of that stuff. Clearly, they're not teaching us that in elementary school. I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Very proud, as you can see in the background. I hardly ever talk about being from Detroit. That's a lie. And growing up, I grew up in Detroit, but went to school in the suburbs because my mother thought that would be a better option for my brothers and sisters and I. So we would literally bus early and walk a mile from, I'm from 7 Mile in DeQuinder. So we would walk up to 8 Mile, like the movie, and take the 8 Mile bus all the way to Harper Woods, which was like a 50-minute bus ride on the public bus system. And every day, like doing this from 4th grade to the day that I graduated high school, you would constantly see the built environment change, but I never knew why. Why was my built environment in Detroit so much different than my classmates' built environment in Harper Woods? And so although I didn't have the words or the verbiage to understand, I knew that there was something different, right? There was something that they had and resources that they had access to that I didn't. From there, growing up, after high school, I went to the University of Michigan, go Blue, for undergrad, where I majored in African American Studies and Women's Studies. I declared African American Studies on my first day of freshman year. Nobody could deter me from it. I was very much wanted to learn more about the things that they were not teaching me in school. I wanted to learn more about the African diaspora. I am half Nigerian, so there were things that I knew, but I wanted to understand it in an academic sense. I wanted to learn more about social movements. I wanted to learn more about people. I wanted to learn more about structural racism and white supremacy. And so that was why I decided to major in that. And then after a while being at the University of Michigan, I decided to add on women's studies again, thinking about how different institutions, as being a woman or being gender fluid or just innately who you are, changes your outcomes in life. That's what really interests me about life and my activism, because I was always really active on campus when it came around education, first generation college students, first generation immigrants. I had a mother who was in prison for 4 years while I was from 10 to 14. So that really interests me as well. And then one day my African American Studies advisor was like, Michigan is recruiting for their planning program. Would you be interested in getting like a graduate degree in planning? And I was like, I don't know what that is. We literally Googled it in her office. She read probably like the first thing that came up on Google. And I was like, sure, why not? I'll be a planner. Because it was the way it was described to me was like, this was the perfect way for me to really shape the built environment and give little Black girls like me more opportunity. And so I was like, you know, that sounds like a fantastic career. Who knew that they existed? So from there, I applied to a whole bunch of different schools, ended up deciding to go to the University of Southern California in South Central LA. Clearly the weather was the selling point for me, not having to stay in Michigan. Went out there for grad school and stayed for 7 years. I recently moved back to the Midwest about a year ago. So my entire career has been in the public sector. I worked for, like Katanya said, I never saw myself working for the government or working for the man, but happened to stumble upon it because I had created a program at the University of Southern California surrounding students, much like Katanya. It's close to my heart. I remember looking at the FLIP program, looking for ideas of how to start this program at USC. And so started the program at USC because I just felt like there was a school in the middle of South Central doing nothing for the community. And that did not make me happy. I was like, y'all sold me on this thing that this school was in the middle of this neighborhood and that you were integrated, but it's really just this school of whiteness surrounded by a fence. And so I convinced them to pay for a program to teach 100 students about the planning profession, and it still goes on today, and I'm really proud of that. So that won me my first American Planning Association award, and from there I was recruited to the city of Los Angeles Planning Department because they had heard about the work that I did at USC, and they wanted to do youth integration in their general plan update. In California, general plans are required by law for all cities. So from there, I started to intern for the city of Los Angeles and eventually started to work full time. I'm a jack of all trades. Zoning and land use is my bread and butter, but I know how to do everything. I can do engagement, I can do outreach, I can do performance management, I can do data. As you'll learn in your career, sometimes you need to know how to do a little bit of everything, especially, at least I can speak for myself, as a Black woman, I don't have the privilege of mediocrity. I have to be the best and better than everybody else at everything. So I've learned a lot and was able to do a lot of different jobs while I was at the city of Los Angeles. When I decided to move back, I wanted to still work in government. So I ended up getting a job as a coordinating planner with the city of Chicago, where I worked on plan developments. So any developments going before the City Plan Commission for Chicago. And then I was recruited to my current position as director of planning for MUSE community design, which I love. This is my first time in the private sector, so it was a very scary transition, but I'm so happy I made it because it gives me a new perspective on how to approach planning, approaching it from the context of a consultant where you're working on different types of projects. Literally every day, I could be working for something on Village, in Forest Park. I could be working on something for CDOT. There's, a range of things that I could be working on. And so that also kind of feeds into my ability to be a jack of all trades, if you say. So yeah, so that's how I ended up here.
Great, thank you. I think kind of what we've been hearing so far is really, that's a question that's come up a lot about how you can make your own opportunities. And I think kind of the common thread between everyone so far is you'll find a passion. You'll find that thing that you can then sell. On the topic of selling, Mike, last but not least, as our special guest, if you can give our audience a little bit of insight into who you are and what you do, please.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Mike Earl. I work for GovHR, and I've been there for about 4 years now. And at GovHR, we do recruitments and interim staffing and HR and management studies throughout the country. But our focus really is, most of our work is in the Midwest, in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We're based out of Northbrook, and we have about about a dozen full and part-time employees and about 20 consultants, again, across the country. So my work specifically focuses on GovTemps, our interim staffing line of business. And I also get involved in some recruitments as well, but our staffing business is pretty robust, and we can talk about this a little bit later, along with some of the offerings that GovHR is making available. But I want to let you know too, I'm a pensioner now, having retired a few years ago with my IMRF pension. And before that, I was a village manager and a department head and HR director. So I've had 30 plus years in local government in the Chicago area. And So I've worked with many of you planners and appreciate the good work that you do. And I really enjoy listening to your stories, and hopefully we'll be able to help out the participants later on with some ideas about what they can do to look for jobs. Thank you.
So I want to segue into our next question with a little bit more about myself. Similar to our panelists that have spoken so far, I kind of found planning as a way to actually engage with the things that I felt like I already knew about the world around me. So I did an undergraduate in sociology, took some classes in urban sociology, and my school, I went to the University of Liverpool back home in the UK. They focused a lot on criminology, because Liverpool is a very working class city with quite a history of crime and riots and things of that nature. So when we looked at urban sociology, one of the main things that we looked at was how the built environment can lend itself to crime or might potentially prevent crime, right? And I thought, cool, that's interesting, but there's probably no such thing as a job in that, so I became a teacher instead. But I kind of knew that it was something that I was really fascinated in, so I went back to the University of Liverpool after a couple of years in teaching, and I took a master's in planning. And I learned everything about the English planning system, the Town and Country Act, green belts, and then a month after graduation, moved to the US, where all of it was useless. But the one piece of advice that I was given, and this is where I'm going to smoothly segue into the next question. The one piece of advice I was given was that the tenets of good planning are universal, right? The basics of good planning, of sustainability, of equity, of everything that you learn about why people become planners, they are universal and will help you wherever you go. So to segue into a question that came up a lot from our attendees as they were signing up, I want to talk about skills. And I want to talk about the skills that you find yourself using on a day-to-day basis that maybe they are very planning specific when we're thinking about GIS and our hard skills and things of that nature. But I also want to think about the skills that maybe not everybody thinks are important to a planner, but maybe that you find yourself using on a day-to-day basis anyway. So Nina, I actually want to start again with you with that, especially thinking in terms of that transition from a career in the public sector to finding yourself launched into the private sector.
Yeah. So for me, like I mentioned or alluded to before, I've had to be a jack of all trades because I came into the profession coming into my master's program. One, I was one of the only people that went straight from undergrad to graduate school. So I was one of the youngest people in my program. I think there may have been 2 or 3 people out of the 90 people in my program, like in my graduating class, that had transitioned right from undergrad to graduate school. Everybody, USC is known as being like a school that you come back after you've had years of experience in the field and come and get your master's degree. It's very much that track. So I came in being young, being Black, being a woman, and then also having this African-American studies and women's studies degree. And people were looking at me like, who is this girl and why is she here? Like, we don't get it. I literally had one of my first interviews for a planning assistant job. The planning manager who eventually hired me said, I almost threw your resume out because I saw your undergraduate degree and didn't understand why you were going to be a planner. Like, this is literally what he said. He was a white man, of course. So every step of my career, I've always had to like push the limits and say like, hey, yes, I understand that that the planning profession has these tools. You have you have your architecture background, you have your urban studies majors and your engineering. But what I think at the core of what people need to understand and don't necessarily give enough credit to is having that humanities background and really understanding movements and peoples and institutions, because we work within an institution that is innately works against vulnerable populations. And that's just the truth. I think COVID-19 has shown us that our social safety nets that we thought were going to be there don't actually exist for a lot of us, and including me, right? And so I think being able to instead of saying, oh, I lack these skills, saying the skills that I have are actually going to empower me to look at this from a different vantage point. And all 90 of my classmates, like I said, coming through, I was like, I don't care if you have an architecture background. I don't care if you went to undergrad at MIT. I don't care, you know, if you were an engineer and you went and had a career for 10 years and then came back to school to be a planner. I'm still going to analyze this, these classes. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm not going to be afraid to be myself, and I'm going to be unapologetic about it, because again, me being able to look at a problem and come up with a different answer because I have a different lived experience is what set me apart. And that's why I've been able to amass the things that I've been able to do in my career at the age that I've been able to do it. I've worked for 2 major cities in the US, both of their planning departments, and have been very successful. And now I'm director of planning at a private firm because I've been able to utilize the things that people thought were going to hold me back in order to say, like, this is a different perspective. This is how we should approach this problem. This is how we should, you know, this is how we should approach the community. This is the history that the community has with this government agency. Let's acknowledge it, and then let's fix it. Where there were other people who were like, oh, let's just put up our Tuesday night meetings and, you know, go in with the same old thing, you know, not understanding that there's outreach fatigue, there's distrust. They're tired of seeing people that don't look like them come and tell them that they're going to make a plan, and then it sits on a shelf for 15 years. Like, these are all things that I think as our planning profession gets more diverse and a little bit younger, that they're coming more to the forefront and becoming a little bit more important.
And I think that's really one of the key points that comes out around so many planners, both kind of at the hiring level and not at the hiring level, is that ability to tell your story, right? And be able to explain why those experiences you have might be strengths. So I tell everybody I meet that I did not do a traditional internship because, frankly, at the time, internships in the UK are almost across the board unpaid. And I tell her I couldn't work for free. I grew up in an extremely working class area. If I'm working, I need to get paid.
I can't work for free. Yes.
Right. But being able to take the experiences I did have, being able to take those, you know, the retail work, the call center work, whatever I did to get by, and put those in a planning context, that's hireable in and of itself, right? Tim, I want to segue over to you, because I know that on kind of the topic of skills and unique ways into things, I know that during the last big crash, you kind of had a somewhat unique experience that maybe kind of helped you with where you are today. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. And actually, I definitely want to echo what Nina said about having those experiences and having those other skills that help bring you to a situation. When I was in school, I had a professor, Dr. Linda Keys, who was a professor of color at Ball State University, and she approached it in a similar manner, saying that, you know, she's not allowed to come in and just give it an average try. She had to be the best. And she had really great advice for our class that said planners don't need to know how to do everything, but they need to be able to find someone who can help get things done. And it's very much about, and in my experience, I found myself as kind of someone who's kind of the cleanup for kind of tasks that others don't necessarily know how to or comfortable taking on. And I've always worked around engineers. In the transportation industry, I'm almost always working around structural and civil engineers. And oftentimes I would speak up and say, you know, I could figure that out, or, you know, I'm not familiar with something, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And so when I was working early in my career, before the recession of 2008, 2009, we're actually a lagging indicator in the transportation industry because funding is usually appropriated and obligated 2-3 years in advance of a project. So we kind of had a slowdown in 2010 to 2012. And my employer was really good at being flexible about that, recognizing that things were going to slow down in different departments. And they actually said, you know, is Tim up for going into construction management? Would he be interested in going into the field? And having been an intern with the Division of Transportation for 3 summers, I had a little bit of familiarity with kind of inspections and construction management, and just being able to go out into the field and, you know, make sure that you're taking care of things. And they actually taught me how to do ADA ramp inspections and keeping track of quantity calculations for construction jobs. And it gave me a really good, more well-rounded appreciation for what it takes to see something built. You know, when you start at the planning level, you start thinking about the long-term vision. And here I was on the other end of that project delivery schedule where I was actually seeing things come down to the nearest square foot or the nearest linear foot of pavement marking. And so by saying yes and by volunteering to do something that was out of my wheelhouse, I think one of the skills that definitely instilled in me as being really valuable is I think planners can do a great job by filling in the gaps of understanding and familiarity by taking on unfamiliar topics or topics that other people that you work with might not be comfortable doing, or even being willing to learn something new and not shying away from something that might not be traditionally you. A lot of us on this panel have talked about the fact that we've taken a somewhat unconventional approach. You know, I got my undergrad in planning, I got my master's in planning, I stayed employed through that whole time, and I consider myself very fortunate, privileged, and thankful for doing so. And I think that one of the things that if I could offer to anybody who's kind of thinking about that is you'll be able to kind of snake your way back to a more conventional planning career, and everything you do along the way is going to also inform that. So if public works departments are looking for people that can be construction assistants, that's a great place to still get into the municipal public sector side, and you'll find yourself working in the engineering division or community development. I've always been on the private sector except when I was an intern, but it gave me a really good appreciation for how public sector agencies and ultimately my clients need to operate to get things done. So I think it's really helpful by thinking about the way that your skills will transition you into different parts of your work. You know, I had to start getting up at 4:30 so that I could be on construction site at 7, so that was less than ideal. But the fact that I was willing to and able to get down to the construction site, I think proved to be very helpful in the long term. So that's kind of how I navigated it. Obviously, our current economic situation makes my experience pale in comparison, so I can't assume that everything will extrapolate that. But I am hopeful that if there are some flexible opportunities where you see it's somewhat tangentially related to planning, the good news is that your background, your experience, and you're willing to navigate through that is a strength.
Thank you.
I think that's a great point and really good examples. And I would echo that as well, because I think we're going through a difficult time right now, and jobs, you know, we're seeing furloughs, we're seeing elimination of positions, and that's going to continue for at least the next year, you know, maybe even longer. So when it comes time for folks who are looking to break into a specific market or to you know, get that first job out of school, I think the more you can be open to new assignments and just getting your foot in the door. And I think Nina said earlier, diversifying your skills and your experiences, it's going to make you that much more marketable when it comes time for you to apply for a full-time position. And know that when you apply for full-time positions, you're going to be up against candidates who are smart and have really good experiences like you. So you need to do what you can to distinguish yourself from the competition for those full-time jobs, and diversifying your experiences and your you know, and being willing to, you know, maybe be a property maintenance inspector or even a building inspector while you're seeking to you know, to do what your passion is calling for, and that's in the planning area. But all those things help you be more marketable for those full-time positions.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And I think kind of on the topic of diversifying and being able to do a little bit of everything, be a little bit of a master of all, it reminds me of something that I was told very early on in my teaching career, which was that you only ever have to be one chapter ahead in the textbook. You just have to know what's coming next before everybody else does, which is my smooth segue to asking you, John, about your personal experiences, because this is something that came up from a number of our attendees who maybe this is a direct second career for them. I think there's a lot of, and Mike, I might ask you to chime in on this one as well. There's a lot of fear amongst people who are having a second career, that they're going to be looked upon negatively for not sticking with something or for making a change. And there's a lot of nerves that they might be seen as untrustworthy because, well, you've left one career, what's going to stop you from leaving this? How did you find that? Was there ever any questions asked of you? Did you deal with that in a specific way, John?
Yeah, so I try to leverage and make the most of my previous experience that led into planning. And I wouldn't say I was ever, penalized for it, although it's a very good point, and I could see how someone might reach that conclusion. The fortunate thing for me is that my prior career was heavy on writing, so I found it useful to, when say writing a cover letter or reaching out to people for the first time, that's usually was their first interaction with me, was reading an email, reading a cover letter, etc., and addressing that head on, saying, here's what I can do for you. Here is the background I'm bringing. Here's what I'm looking to do. And doing that in a succinct and direct manner, that kind of got around that issue. Also, I would say that, and Mike was kind of saying this, the idea of making a gradual transition into the field where you are, maybe it's something else that's really, baking the bread at the moment. You're really getting paid for some other task. Maybe that's in the career that you want to leave, but just can't quite yet. You can get in. Actually, I would say you can get into planning whenever you want, because now it's tough. We all have different personal experiences. If we have families and we barely have enough hours in the day to get our day job done, how are we going to moonlight with something in planning? I understand it doesn't work for everyone, but for maybe the folks on the phone who are students or recent graduates, and they are doing something that's not planning to pay the bills, there are so many organizations out there who could use your expertise. And that's the thing to remember, be confident. You actually do have some skills and expertise now. So many, and they may not put those on job boards or may not widely publicize them, but you can find them and reach out. You can reach out through organizations like APA-IL to find out, okay, who could use a quick study on, a survey of bike data and break it down, and a quick report and that kind of thing. You'd be surprised how much you can build in doing things like that. And then all of a sudden, hey, you just, amass some experience that you can talk about. And that's what planning is. I mean, you've done planning, even if you're not getting paid to do it directly as your total day job. And if you're comfortable with that at first, and you build enough of that and you kind of wait it out, then you can find that eventually maybe something will open up that it can really be your primary job.
Wonderful. Yeah, you reminded me a little bit of when I first kind of got to this country. I wasn't driving. Me and my wife were sharing one car, and I took a job at a Best Buy just to pay the bills to get by. And so she would, we worked across the street from each other, but we didn't have matching schedules. So she dropped me at the Panera that was next door to the Best Buy I worked in, and I'd spend like 5 hours a day waiting for my shift to start, just refreshing the page on the APA job board and sending out emails to planners in the area like, hey, help. So yeah, I mean, there really is no shame in taking a job to pay the bills and doing what you need to do to get by in the meantime. The next question I want to pass over to Katanya, because I think you have a great way of achieving this, honestly. A lot of questions coming in from our attendees in the registration were about networks, right? Because we're all always told it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and all that kind of stuff. And I think you have a great way of building a network of like-minded people and people who are interested in the same things that you are. So what opportunities are there, and how should somebody go about getting to know people in the world of planning and finding people that can help their career, not necessarily in the traditional or the assumed you scratch my back, I scratch yours, but how can you reach people that you can work with to build who you are, is my question, I guess.
That's a great question. Sorry, my internet is ridiculous, so I dropped off for a while, but I'm back. So I was confronted with a lot of struggle with trying to find my space in planning when I first started out. And mainly that was during the time that I was in grad school. Same type of experience as being in the architecture program in undergrad was the same kind of experience that I had in grad school, where there were, Black people were few and far between in these spaces. And so in grad school, when, and Nina and I know this, when we see each other, it's like, hey, we try to cling on to each other. And that's what happened with between myself and 3 other fellow MUPs at UIC. We were like, we kept seeing each other in passing. We were never in the same classes together, but we knew that we acknowledged that the others were there. And finally, I pulled one of them aside, like, hey, let's talk, and then we eventually got together. We started hanging out, started studying together, and learning from one another. And then we decided to form an organization called the Society of Black Urban Planners. And so that organization was formed because of the lack of, one, the clear, it was clear that there's just not a lot of recruitment at the time. There wasn't a lot of recruitment happening for Black students. Like, it just didn't appear that the desire for the university to bring in Black students at that time was there. And so we were like, okay, this is an issue, because most of the folks that are coming out of this program are being funneled into communities that they are not from. And, so they're learning all of this stuff, this history that, or planning theory that doesn't necessarily apply to urban communities or communities of color. And so we were like, okay, we have to address that. And so that organization is one way that I started to build my own network, by recognizing where there were deficits in, the spaces that I was in. Like, it's one thing to, be in a space where there's other people that are there for the same reason. There's another, it's a whole other thing when you're in a space with people who have some history, some shared history and understanding of social dynamics and just understanding of cultural components that led us to this job, this career anyway. So that's why it was so important for me to start that. And I'm not saying that everybody has to go out and start an organization, but I think it's really just identifying where there are areas that you can fulfill a need. And I think, John, I kind of heard some of your points about like the just recognizing where your skills are. You can draw that into this space as well. Like, how do you use what you know to attract those other people that know it as well? I know that one other way to build networks was through wanting to sit for the AICP exam. So there's other people who are, wanting to do that as well. And so you naturally look for those people. I'm always looking at Nina like, okay, so what we gonna do? So it's like just thinking a little bit more outside the box and not waiting for organizations to do it for you, but then also looking at those organizations that already have those mechanisms in place and taking full advantage of it and keeping up with those, the people that you meet. Don't just hand them a card. I will say this, I've always told people it's really important to have a card, even if you don't work for an organization. Just buy yourself some cards.
Yep.
Type out your name and your skills and your email address, and then one other thing that's helped me a lot is social media. So I got a lot of there's a lot of people that reach out to me via social media because I talk about planning all the time on social media, especially on Twitter. And so people have, and I talk about planning issues that are that can be controversial, but things that are really important to me personally, and it attracts other people who are like, okay, I want to pick your brain about this. And so my network has just kind of grown organically by being my authentic self, by printing out business cards and like handing them out wherever I was going. And you know, kind of stepping outside of my natural comfort zone where, you know, I've moved into the space of being an ambivert. I used to be an introvert, and now I'm like kind of in between introverted and extroverted. And so, and I'm cool with that now. You know, you just kind of have to step out there a little bit further than you normally would. And so, yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the things that I've done to build my networks, and it just kind of has continued to grow. And then also, you know, having mentors. The APA mentoring program, APA Illinois' mentoring program was really phenomenal. APA National has one as well. I still talk to my mentors. They're wonderful people who have connected me through their networks. So, you know, finding those individuals who are going to be a champion for you, who are going to, you know, you get a chance to get to know them and share your, you know, what you know and what you've learned, and then they are sharing with you so that they can speak for you. You need somebody to vouch for you. And I've been super, super fortunate in all of my experiences thus far to have people that see me. You know, you don't want people to lie. Like, you have to actually, you know, show and prove, but you also want people to know that you're doing these things. And so don't be afraid to celebrate your accomplishments and celebrate on social media or whatever channel, LinkedIn, whatever, that you choose to do that. But, you know, let it be known, and stay connected with those people who are going to celebrate that with you and share it with the world as well.
That's thank you. That was a fantastic answer. I remember it was a couple of years ago. I was invited to an event at the U.S. Embassy down in London, the U.S. Embassy to the U.K., and there was a conversation about Brexit. And I asked a question about the socioeconomic impacts of Brexit in Liverpool, because we had received a large amount of social funding from the EU, and I guess nobody else in the audience had been approaching it from that angle. So the State Department team that were hosting it were like, "Do you have a card?" And I was like, "No, why would I have a card? I'm a student." And my handwriting's terrible, so I awkwardly wrote out my email address for them. And I've never not had a business card in my pocket since that day, because you never ever know when you're going to meet someone who's going to want to get in touch with you because you have something to offer. I'm going to open up that question on building networks to the panel, but while we do so, we're entering the last kind of 5 or 10 minutes of this now. I just want to kind of say again to all the attendees, thank you, but this really is your time. Put something in the chat box if there's something that you feel like we haven't covered. If we can get to it, we will. If not, we'll be taking notes of it. So if you're listening to this, please go ahead and drop something in that chat box for us. And in the meantime, I guess we'll kind of keep talking about networks if anyone else wants to chime in on that one.
I like what Katanya was saying about making sure that you're out there and you're present and you're celebrating things. And then John touched on, you know, even if you're not doing something that's paying you specifically for the planning work you're doing, that counts as experience. And so there's a couple of people that I've seen who are chatting here, and I recognize a couple of names. And that reminds me of another thing that I think is extremely valuable. You know, Philip and Katanya mentioned, you know, celebrating and participating in APA events, doing the things that get you in front of others, acknowledging your introversion, extroversion, or your ambiversion tendencies. There are people that I communicate with kind of every month or so, or quarterly via LinkedIn or a chat, that are still looking to get into the industry. And if anything that I want to make sure that I make very clear, especially to people who are new to the industry or are kind of shy or feel like they're not yet allowed to create space in the industry because they haven't, you know, gotten that long resume, do not hesitate to reach out. Feel free to send people messages on LinkedIn. Even blind cold calling, you're not going to get a lot of responses, but there are people out there that do respond. And the minute you have that connection, that is the person who will introduce you to the next person, and so on and so forth. So don't hesitate and don't feel shy to reach out. I think people are definitely out there who are willing to listen. Obviously, this panel was more than happy to talk on this topic. So the fact that APA Illinois and the membership committee and the different subcommittees within APA Illinois take advantage of what's free. You know, these webinars, when they're available this is networking. All of you who are chatting in the chat box, look at those names, remember who's in there. And the next time you see them, you'll be like, oh, I remember when you listened in on such and such. That's a great way to start building that network. And then when you start writing those cover letters, as John mentioned, or you start volunteering for events, you have now become a familiar face. And so you start to build your brand and your reputation in the industry is, you know, so-and-so is just fresh out of school, but they're always willing to help out in an event, even if it's just for 2 hours. Then you become that person that people say, you know, I remember meeting someone that might be a good fit for this. And I think that's a really good way to say that I may not be working right away, but I'm already part of the planning industry because of what you're doing. So recognize that that's valuable, and that what you're providing by being new to the industry is really giving that fresh perspective and helping people talk about things that either they didn't consider, or in a lot of places, they're just not comfortable or used to having those conversations. And the newer group of people entering the industry are really going to be the ones who are kind of driving that conversation.
Great, thanks, Tim. John, I see your hand up. We'll get to you in just a second. We have reached the end of our formal time. Hi. We've reached the formal end of our time. So I am going to wrap it up officially for those of our attendees who need to leave, but we've been receiving a lot of requests from attendees and even from our panel to keep this going. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to formally wrap us up for those of us that need to leave in the attendee group. But for anyone who wishes to stay, I guess we'll keep chatting for a little bit. Emily, if you want to formally wrap us up.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you so much for those that are here that are going to take off right now. Thank you for coming. I hope this was helpful, and please consider checking out some of the events that are listed here, or some of the resources, especially GovHR is offering a free resume review for those that are new graduates or local government staff members in transition. And if you're interested in continuing to talk to folks, look for the more informal networking events that APA Illinois is doing. And thank you so much for joining, and I'll let you continue the conversation here. It's great stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, we've kind of been receiving a lot of requests to keep it going. Again, just for any attendees that do need to leave, there's been a request just for Mike, if you can just give us an overview of the services and the great stuff that GovHR is offering to our students and our local government employees in transition right now.
Yeah, thank you. We all have backgrounds in local government, so we know that this time that we're experiencing now is very challenging and difficult. And we've thought about ways that we can help out, especially those people who are graduating and looking for that first job, and the folks who are in transition and looking for their next work opportunity. So what we've decided to do, or what we've done, is we're opening up our consultants and our staff to resume review. So those people who would like their resume, who are interested in pursuing a job in local government, they can send us their resume, and we'll take a look at it and offer some advice. I've gone through 2 already, and I've got a call tomorrow with a person. So it won't be just resume review. It'll be a little coaching advice as well. So in addition, we've embarked on an initiative called GovHR Resume Connect. So if you're looking for a position, you can go on our website, send us your resume. You'll be asked to fill out a little questionnaire, and we'll put your resume in buckets based on the vocations that you're most interested in being considered for. And then those buckets are going to be available to our clients, our communities across the country who will be looking to find people in those particular areas. So it's a free service, and I would encourage all those looking for jobs to take advantage of it. So check out our website, govhrusa.com, and also to everyone, fill out or go to govhrjobs.com, and you can get our weekly job announcements. There's no charge, and whether you're looking or not looking for a job, or active or passively looking, you'll see what comes across our desk. And those are there's generally a fee for a client to to pay to put a job on our job board, but we're making it free for the rest of the year through December. So any questions, I'm happy to take in this venue, or if you want to call me offline or reach out, I'm happy to help out where I can and where GovHR can be of assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, I guess we've formally, it's over, but we're going to keep it going. In England, we call that a lock-in. I don't know if it's the same thing over here, but the pub is closed, but we're all still here.
Last audits.
So for anybody who is leaving us now because they have any other commitments, I did just want to make everyone aware, this is all being recorded. It's going to be posted on the APA Illinois YouTube channel and our social media accounts. So even if you do have to get off, you won't miss any of the rest of the conversation. You'll have an ability to check it out after the fact. And kind of as Tim alluded to speak for myself, not speak for anybody else, I'm definitely happy for anyone who wants to reach out, drop me an email, find me on LinkedIn, whatever you need to do. I'm definitely open to that, and kind of as we go through conversations, if the other panelists want to allude to if that's something that you're good with too, we can go through that. So there's a question that's come through a couple of times in the chat box that's asking a little bit more about the differences. I guess if I was to sum it up, I'd say the differences between being a planning student and being a planner. So from the perspective of what did being a grad student do for you? It was one of the questions. So how did that really help to give you an advantage? And then kind of on the flip side of that is, what have you learned as a professional that you wish you'd have known as a student? So John, if we'll start with you.
First of all, it's after 3, so now this is the Pathways to Parenting webinar. Hope you don't mind the extra panelists as we go into overtime here for a minute. But I can directly speak to what you just asked about being a grad student, because this is actually the closing thought I want to give, because then I have to go, right, kiddo? Earlier in the session, I had said that if you, kiddo, I had said that you could seek out an organization or a community, a city, and so on, and basically volunteer to do planning work. And I don't want to step on the comment from Nina and you, Phil, that just there are a lot of folks who can't afford to do that. So here's an idea for you grad students out there who, again, grad students, I suppose undergrads as well, I don't want you to undercount the experience you already have, the skills you've already built in your programs, because they're already valuable even if you're not done with your program. So urban planning grad students will almost always have to do a master's project, or they'll have a studio class that they'll have to do. MPA students, I saw the MPA pop up in the chat, you'll probably have a capstone that you'll have to do. That kind of work is valuable to organizations and to cities. It's valuable enough that if you make a good pitch, they might pay you for it. They might not pay you a lot, but they will pay you for it. And it can often be a savings to them, as opposed to hiring a consultant with a big brand and so on, that they probably have to go through some kind of lengthy RFP to arrive at and procure funds and all of that. But to find a group of students, maybe one who's mentored by a professor or so on, and hire them to complete a certain study that's just been on the shelf but needs done. That's the kind of thing that, especially in this time, it's a savings. It's something that an organization can look at and say, yeah, we hired these students and we saved our community however many thousands of dollars because we use student work. And student work can still be really high quality work. It really is and can be. And so from the employer side, there's actually a lot of benefit to that. And then from the student side, you're doing your master's project or your capstone, you're getting credit, you're fulfilling. Yes, she's excited now. You're getting the credit that you need, but you're also getting paid a little bit. So, and now you can really go into that. Let's say you do that engagement, you go after that step and you can say, hey, I was part of a project team that did a professional project. I have professional experience. Maybe you were the manager of that. You initiated the whole thing. So you can say you have project management experience, which is really just a fancy way of saying you know how to get something done and work with other people. So I'd advise folks to, if you're a ways out from your master's project or your capstone, and if your program at your university allows you the flexibility to think about it this way, start thinking about it. I'll give you one specific lead on this. I used to work with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and there's a program called Local Technical Assistance, where lots of communities apply for basically an in-kind grant to get professional work done for them that they otherwise probably couldn't do on their own. Well, not everybody can get picked for that grant. So what you might do is, who are the losers? Who didn't get picked? Who still has a grant or a project out there that they want to get done, who's kind of thought it through, and they know they want this study, they want this corridor plan, they want this transportation study, and reach out to them and say, here's the pitch. Anybody can do that. And I really think a lot of those communities would listen.
Well, thank you, John. I'll let you go back to your other job. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, John. Nina, I want to kick the question about master's programs to you real quick. The benefits you felt to having a master's degree, and also kind of how, I guess not just beneficial, but how much that master's degree reflects the real world that you work in now as well.
Yeah. It's interesting because I will say I went to USC. I'm a Trojan, but I'm a Wolverine at heart. I hardly actually ever claim USC for real. But I paid them a lot of money to get that degree. And I think it was really important for me. It was more about the context of that experience than it was actually getting the paper degree. Because I know planners who are doing perfectly well who don't have master's degrees. They were just on a different track. They were able to be in the same place that I am. Actually, my really good friend back in LA, she only has an undergraduate degree, but she works for one of the council members. She's his planning deputy. Like she's, we're on the same track, and she just decided not to get a master's degree. For me, because my undergraduate degree was in African American Studies and Women's Studies, again, going back to the original theme of I gotta be better than everybody, I was like, okay, I have to have something to solidify me in this profession and say, like, I'm not here to play, like I know what I'm talking about, which is also why I got my AICP, because that's another layer of like, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm talking about. And so I also think that picking USC's program was very strategic for me, because that planning program is actually in the School of Public Policy. So we think very big picture, very much about like how to write policy. How does policy affect different populations of people? Where there's other planning programs that are much more specific, are like reading plans, reading site plans, like land use and zoning. That was not my that was not what USC's program was about. So one, it's about picking the program that you think is going to be the best for you. I knew, looking back, I didn't know it then, but I know now, all the skills that I needed to do to be a public sector planner, I learned on the job pretty much, and I used my network. And like APA was a huge game changer for me, because when I moved across the country, didn't know anybody, didn't have no friends or family in LA. I ended up winning first place in the California Planning Foundation, which is the philanthropy part of APA California. Ended up winning first place for their student scholarship and got a position on their state board. And from there, my life has changed completely. Every opportunity, the reason that I'm in Chicago is because of somebody I met in APA in 2013, Angela Brooks, who Katanya and I both know very well. In fact, I talked to Katanya before I even moved here because of Angela. Like I was using my APA network in order to get these opportunities, to get these jobs. I relied on a coworker when I was an intern at the city of LA, because I didn't know how to read plans, right? I was in a program that was very up here, which helped me long-term, because I know how to write policy. I know how to write ordinances. I've written laws before for both Los Angeles and for Chicago. But I relied on my network. I literally sat at lunch, like during my time at the city of LA, with this one of my very lovely mentors, and she taught me how to read site plans and how to understand the differences between different types of zoning and things like that. So I didn't learn that in the classroom. I had to spend extra time outside of the classroom utilizing my network in order to get those skills, so that when it came time for me to graduate and apply for those assistant planner jobs, I not only had the hard skills, but I also had kind of the softer skills of thinking about like long-term implications of certain policy. So it just depends on what you want to get out of your master's program. Some people like the hard and fast land use and zoning. That wasn't very interesting to me back then, but now it's a lot of what I do. And it just leads back to being able to diversify and be kind of like a jack of all trades. And I love what Tim said earlier, because it's so true. You just need to know enough to tell somebody else what you need done. That is literally how, like, I don't need to know GIS very well. I mean, like for me, I don't need to know GIS very well, but what I need to know is how much time does it take to get what I need done on a map done, so I can instruct somebody else what to do and be cognizant of how to get it back to the client or how to get it to the public in a manageable amount of time. And so I can dibble and dabble in GIS, but I'm not an expert, right? So it's like being able to have those skills and be cognizant of how much time and effort it takes to complete certain tasks, but not thinking that you have to be like an expert. But you should, go where your passion is. Clearly, I've made a name for myself in my career as far as being like in land use and zoning. And it's funny because when I got to the city of Chicago and I was placed doing plan development, doing land use and zoning, people came to meet me and they're like, oh, they haven't had a Black person up in land use and zoning like ever. Like they had never seen a Black woman like doing that type of work, which I found to be funny. But it set me apart from a lot of other applicants that I had come from a city and had learned how to do land use and zoning and do, transportation planning. It had that skill set in order to get me a job in Chicago. It was something that benefited me because I'd had that skill set. So yeah, I think, as far as a master's program, I think it's more about what you want to get out of it, but also be cognizant that depending on what program you pick, you still need to have certain skill sets that your program may not cover. Because at the end of the day, they want your money and they want to give you a piece of paper and you're going to walk away, hopefully not in as much debt as I am, but you're going to walk away and you're still going to need the skill sets in order to actually get you hired, right? And you also want to think about the network. So like my Michigan network is amazing because it's Michigan, but then also the Trojan network in USC was also a very robust network in California in order to like get me into certain rooms, into certain conversations. The fact that people knew my name once I won my first APA award and that led to me winning my second APA award, right? It was through that Trojan network. And so I think also utilizing both your school network on top of your APA network is very, very crucial. Don't come across, this is the thing, when you're networking and things like that, people can see through fakeness. So be very genuine. Like, don't just contact people just to be contacting them and waste their time. Like, be diligent, have questions prepared, like say like, if we have an hour, a half hour on the schedule, I'm going to be there right at the time and I'm going to end because I respect your time, and people, will, respond well to that. So that's just a little piece of advice for all the grad students.
Appreciate that. Tim, any thoughts on your master's experience?
I'm gonna say goodbye. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, Philip, certainly. One of the things, I know that we're talking about, the flexibility and how your soft skills are actually very valuable, and they absolutely are. And I do definitely want to circle back to kind of some of the skills that you do learn in your master's program. A couple of things that I found very helpful, and this is a truth that I have seen, is that if you've ever worked on a group project and you were the person that is cracking the whip and getting your group to finish things on time and on quality, you already have the skills to become a project manager. I will tell you that right now, that if you're that kind of personality type, that is something worth honing and definitely using to your advantage as you enter the industry. And not being afraid to be the person that takes the reins going, okay, there's 4 of us, I'm not sure who's really in charge. It becomes apparent. So sensing that dynamic and knowing how to work with it is really valuable. One of the things that I would say from a hard skill standpoint is, and there were some questions that came up in this, is things that you wish you would know more of or less of. I also think that it's helpful to go back to some of the really good basics. I think that if you have a good, strong sense of how to navigate your way around Microsoft Excel, you can do quite a lot with data and visualization, and you don't necessarily need to be an expert in GIS to do that. If you do know GIS, I think that's also very helpful, and recognizing that the ability to do ArcGIS online is also a nice, great way to get some soft familiarity with software skills without necessarily needing to own expensive software. So having access to that, I think, is really good. And then if you don't know something, it's not a bad thing to admit that, but also be the kind of person that says, I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to figure out a way. I think that is a really helpful thing. And it's even more powerful once you are into an internship or employment capacity and you say something like that, because that also shows your willingness to figure things out on behalf of your team. And I think that's really valuable. So when I was in the graduate program, I was very fortunate enough to have a research assistantship, which paid for a portion of my program. And it put me in front of the kinds of people that are writing federal grants to do research projects and paying attention to the kinds of questions my advisor was asking me, so that it would help her application so that she could continue to get funding for future years. I hung on to that because it made me realize that you need to listen to what your teammates and your employers and your stakeholders and your clients are looking for. And if you think about what it is they're trying to achieve and your role is to help facilitate that, as long as you approach the profession in that way, I think that puts you in a really strong position to be someone that people rely on, and that they always say, you know, I'm going to go talk to Nina because she always has a unique perspective on how to approach a problem that I may not be looking for. And so feeling like you're part of a team, I think, is really strong. I have been fortunate enough to work with people who are straight out of school, fresh out of school, who participate in some of the APA Illinois events, whether they're just an attendee or they want to do some sort of logistic support for it. Again, becoming that familiar face, I think, goes a long way. So when I was in graduate school, I took the opportunity to go to things like Transport Chicago, and be able to kind of get myself out there and network with people that I looked up to and hoped that someday I would work alongside with. And I'm really thankful to say that that has proven to be successful over the last decade or so for me. And I certainly encourage others to give that a shot as well.
So Tim, we did get a follow-up question for you in the chat box about skill sets for transportation planners or people who want to be transportation planners who maybe don't have a strong engineering background. How can you establish yourself in a field that can be very engineering dominated?
That's a good question. I found myself entering a very engineering leaning industry because of my first job out of school was working at an engineering firm, but within the planning department. So there was like a small island oasis for us who had the AICP mindset entering into that world. But I was always interested in what the engineering folks were doing because it kind of reminded me of some of that stuff I had done as an intern where I got to see things being built. And I used to joke that, you know, engineers round to the nearest, you know, hundredth of a foot when doing certain stationing, or the nearest quarter inch if you're in architecture, or 16th of an inch if you're an electrical engineer, and planners rounded to the nearest 25 years. But I'm starting to see that thinking big picture has also been helpful in working with engineers. And I kind of came into it with a crisis of identity, thinking that I was kind of not belonging in the right spot, or this wasn't the right space for me. And so I made it my business to try and learn as much as I could about things that were not something that I had learned in school. You know, not having the civil engineering background, I kind of felt like I wasn't allowed to have an opinion on whether a certain intersection design was safer for pedestrians. But I spoke up and I said, you know, it doesn't seem intuitive. And I had the really good fortune to work on a project doing transportation planning studies with a behavioral psychologist from Western Michigan, in Kalamazoo. And by learning how he approached transportation, not as an engineer, it suddenly illuminated that you can approach transportation from your background and kind of seeing how that would work. And then I will say, from an employment standpoint, the majority of people that do transportation planning work for public agencies, especially in the Chicago metro region. Most of them are employed by CMAP. So if transportation is your thing, I consider those of us in the private sector slightly more of outliers than the norm. But transportation planning and the traditional 4-step model, working for an MPO is definitely where you can get your start. And if you're thinking about what your day-to-day would be, I've got some friends and colleagues that work for CMAP, and you're not necessarily the sole person responsible for working on that model. So don't feel as though you need to know it inside and out on day one. One of my colleagues spent 2 or 3 years just cleaning up how the process was going for how crashed data were being reported. So it wasn't even necessarily an analysis of the model itself, but ways to help people communicate better with one another. So if you think about the kinds of things and visualize what you might do, I would say that if you enter it, think about how you approach large data sets, how you communicate with people about process and workflow, and find ways where you can take a look at a large data set and help somebody who's not a technical expert make sense of it. So your job as a planner may also be in education. And that brings me kind of to my last point, because I've got a meeting at 3:30 I'm going to head on to. But being a planner in an engineering type of an environment, I made it my business to learn the things that I wasn't sure I knew very well. And that started to cause me to explain it to a third party. And I suddenly realized that what I really enjoyed was learning through teaching. I felt that I needed to know design manuals inside and out. And so I would use that, and I would use the details within it to kind of communicate why I felt a certain way. And now a lot of what I do in my work is also to develop education and training materials and give webinars and presentations on things like bicycle and pedestrian facility design. And I come at it from the perspective of a planner and how do people use it. So I wouldn't shy away from transportation if you're afraid that you're going to be faced with some hard engineering questions. I've had the fortune to be mentored by engineers who are like, you think like an engineer, you speak like a planner, that's actually pretty powerful, and I think you should use it to your advantage. So definitely lean in when it comes to that, because there's a lot of things in the transportation industry that even if they may not admit it to you, sometimes engineers don't understand it either.
It's thank you, Tim. I do kind of want to, and we'll let you head off to your meeting, and thank you so much for all your time. We really appreciate it. I kind of want to echo something that Tim touched on and Nina definitely touched on, and at the same time answer a question that came in for me and John left. So Emily, I'm going to tag you in on this one if you want to join us real quick. I was asked in the chat about what the exciting part, or the most exciting part of being a municipal planner is. And similar to Katanya, similar to Nina, I didn't want to be a government planner. I super did not want to be a government planner. Like I said before, I didn't do a traditional internship, but I did shadow some local government planners back home. And I remember meeting one of them and I was like, oh, so what do you do? And she was like, well, I'm the fence planner. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? She's like, oh, well, most of my day is spent telling people if they can paint their fences certain colors. And I almost withdrew my application for my master's then and there, because I was like, this sounds like nothing like what I want to do. And lo and behold, that's what I do now. And I've never been happier in a job. And I think kind of to echo the points that have been made before, I think what makes it exciting, what makes it great for me is I'm learning something new every single day, right? My master's kind of did split itself pretty well between big picture and in the weeds technical studies, but not much of that really applied over here. So same as Nina, I was kind of there studying how to read a site plan every single day and learning the different ways around it. So it's been a great learning experience for me, and working in local government for sure. People will throw things at you that you will never expect them to throw at you, resident stakeholders, however you want to refer to them. There will be something new for you to do every single day. Emily?
Yeah, I also thought that municipal planning work was going to be the last thing that I was going to be in, but I actually really do enjoy it. And the top 2 reasons I would say that I enjoy municipal planning work specifically is, one, you can see a project from start to finish. You know, there are very few projects that go from the planning stage to actual implementation But I think that is one thing that's really exciting, is when you can start with an idea with a community and follow it through until you can see it realized, and you're in that one community the entire time. That's really rewarding when it does happen. And then also one thing that I really enjoy is just working with the community, especially those folks that come in very skeptical of the government in general, oftentimes with good reason. Really showing them that, hey, we're here to serve you, and working really closely with them in a way that can build their trust is really rewarding, and also really powerful in the sense that they then oftentimes become the folks that will show up to the next public outreach meeting. And so they're the ones that are putting their ideas out there. So I really love that, showing that government can be trusted at times, and that we really are, when we're doing our job well, we're doing something that's a really beneficial end result for the community. So that's some of the rewarding things that I personally get out of municipal planning in particular.
Great, thanks. Nina.
Oh, I was just, okay. No, I was just gonna ask for Katanya, because, you know, she's a traditional planner working in kind of like a non-traditional role, like working in a mayor's office, working in that kind of capacity, but you're still working for the city, you're still working for the city of Chicago, you're still helping to shape the built environment. And so I would love to hear your perspective on, like, you know, being a planner, you know, you've gone from this traditional role to this kind of non-traditional role. Like how does that look, and how have you like adjusted to it, and do you like it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I was ready to respond about the grad school thing. I didn't get a chance to share some of my insights from grad school. But before I answer your question, Nina, I will say, just to my experience at CMAP, you know, I started there as an intern, and that opened up so many doors for me and helped me in my head to think about different areas of planning that I could possibly be interested in, because CMAP, as the MPO, you know, has a hand in so many pots and in so many areas of planning. I was able to like literally have just about any area of planning that I could possibly want to learn about, like right there in one office space. So like, yes, I agree with Tim on, like, if you can work at an MPO like CMAP, do it. CMAP is definitely a competitive place to get into. I'm not saying it like, oh yeah, go over there, like that's easy. It's not easy. I'm not gonna lie to you. But if you can, you know, beef up your resume, you know, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested in applying. I talk to you about some things, you know, that I use to help get myself into it. And then also I had, you know, champions around me to help me to get into that space. People who saw me and introduced me to people there. And, you know, that just continued. And when I went through the hiring process, it made it so much easier because they remembered me. So make yourself memorable. So to Nina's question about working in the mayor's office in a non-traditional role, it is definitely quite a shift. It is unlike anything I'd ever imagined, because especially right now with COVID, it's all hands on deck. Everyone is very much focused. And so planners, we kind of move slow. We, you know, are thinking 30 years out. You know, we're not thinking about what's happening right here, right now. And so like, just, you know, this moment in time is forcing me to think about things, you know, really quickly, and, you know, trying to make some moves as, you know, with others and working with people in ways that I hadn't had to work with them before, especially being remote from everyone. So it's just, you know, it's a completely new type of environment, very fast paced. Naturally, without COVID, it's very fast paced in the mayor's office specifically. Other areas of the city might not be as quick, but anyway, everything is always high speed and you know, very demanding. You know, the need to be on point is very important. And it's not that I wasn't, you know, didn't feel that same sense of urgency when working, you know, as a planner. It's just, it really is a different ball game.
Would you say because like politically, because you're working for somebody who's trying to get reelected in a short amount of time, right? So it's different when you work in a department where it's like, okay, you know, we have our director, we're here, we're doing work, and then, but now you're in this like, okay, we got 4 years to get X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. You know, I mean, and so, and I come from you know, I'm just coming from an agency that put out a really great comprehensive plan, and we took our time to really be intentional about all of the components that go into that plan. That was a 3.5-year process. You know, and, you know, when we move into city government, it is, a lot of things are, you know, kind of constrained by the election cycle. And so, you know, well, and that's not everywhere, because some places, and I believe California is one state where comprehensive planning is a mandatory thing for that state, whereas the state of Illinois does not have this as a mandatory regular occurrence. And so, so city of Chicago, you know, wants a comprehensive plan, but it's, you know, it can be tough to try to figure out how to make that work within an election cycle. So it's just, if you have questions about that, we can talk about that offline, because I don't want to get off into the politics. But yeah, so, you know, thinking about those things as a planner, like thinking about, oh my goodness, like, you know, there are steps to these processes and steps that I'm accustomed to, and most planners are accustomed to, that are shifted in ways that are, you know, you have to be a little bit more creative and nimble to be able to make this stuff make sense and come together in ways that you didn't have to do it before, because it was it was like a, you know, it was pretty much linear. Like, you know, you do this part, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, boom, you're done. Now it's like, you know, everything is like mixed up in a different kind of way. And especially because cities like Chicago, where it's constantly moving and never sleeps, there's always something going on. Then you drop COVID on top of it, and you know, it's a whole other kind of beast. So, I mean, as far as whether or not I like it, I think I'm really, for the most part, I'm enjoying it. I have my desires to go back to, like, oh my gosh, I want to get back into GIS. I really want to like zero in on some maps. I want to, you know, geek out and do some real like planning, tangible things. But I also know that I'm exercising muscles that I didn't necessarily exercise before, and that's really in the policy space. So I'm like really digging deep to understand ordinances and laws and like how that stuff works, and then also how I can help impact that as a lifelong resident of the city of Chicago, as a Black woman living in the city of Chicago, as a Black woman who is in the mayor's office as a planner, you know, kind of influencing some of these policies. Like, those are some of the things that I'm really proud of being able to do. It's not, you know, to our earlier discussions, Black women are, you know, we're not always in the mix on things. So to be able to sit at these tables and directly, you know, have some sort of an impact on some of this stuff is really powerful for me. And, you know, it definitely, it is something that I will truly cherish, and I really appreciate it. And I'm forever grateful for the opportunity. It's really amazing to be there. So.
Thank you. And we're gonna leave it there. I think we had a great conversation, and genuinely thank you all for the conversation. Thank you to our attendees for providing us with questions. And like I've said many times over, even if we didn't get to your specific question, we have it, it's recorded, we hear you, we know that you're out there, we know that there's a whole bunch of different ways you must be feeling right now. We're probably all feeling them too. But, you know, we're all, as professionals and as individuals and as human beings, we're all here to support you guys and help you out and make you guys feel better. So definitely reach out to us, reach out to the APA, reach out to us individually. You know, we're all pretty findable on LinkedIn. I have a nice big shiny head on there, so just reach on out. And, you know, I think we've all kind of touched on it in varying ways, but I think I can safely speak for all of us when I say we're all doing this because, at least for me personally, I feel like I owe this to people because I've received this myself, right? I've had people who were willing to take a chance on me. I've had people who were willing to give me advice and sit down and go get coffee back when in the before times going getting coffee was a thing, right? I've had people who've been willing to have that conversation with me. So I think all of us, it probably comes from that place of let's be those people who are now willing to have conversations with you guys as well. So reach out. We really hope you found it useful. We really hope you found it helpful. Whether you learned some practical advice or just took some comfort in our stories, I hope it was beneficial to you. Thank you all for joining us.